Hi, everybody. Welcome to Profiling Evil. I'm Mike King, and I'm here with my good buddy, Chris McDonough. Chris, how are you doing tonight?
Mike, greetings. Good to see you, my friend.
We are really pumped up about this tonight, folks. We have two people from the Cold Case Foundation that you're going to want to have back over and over again, as do we. And I want to take a moment and introduce them. And first, what I'm going to do is introduce Greg Cooper, who is the executive director of the Cold Case Foundation, and he's my mentor, my Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I recently, Greg, was chatting with some of the Buddhist monks in my community, and they said they kept reflecting back and talking about their master. And there's a certain level of gratitude for the person that I think taught you some things that have really made a difference in your life. And so you've been my Obi-Wan, and I'm just so thrilled you're here. And in a second after I just say Dean's name, I want you to just take a second or two and tell people a little bit about your background. And then, Dean, if we could, we'd like you to do the same thing. But it's kind of they'll get to know you. But Dean, raise your hand real quick so everybody gets to know. Okay, this is Dean, and Greg, raise your hand. And Greg, why don't you take a minute? Tell us a little bit about your background and how you landed at the Cold Case Foundation. But keep it really short because we're going to kind of drag out how the Cold Case Foundation came to be over the course of the next bit.
Well, you called me your Obi-Wan Kenobi. It reminds me of a term that you used in Egypt. Do you recall that nickname that you gave me? You might want to say that with the audience.
Yeah. I called you Gandhi, if I remember right.
I think that's what it had to do with, was it? What a great teacher I was. You can tell that story some other time. My name is Greg Cooper. It's a real pleasure to be here with you, Mike, and Chris, and of course to have Dean here with us. My background is been a former police chief a couple times, and then I was with the FBI for 10 years and had the opportunity of being assigned to the profiling unit, supervised the VICAP program, and then eventually the profiling unit. After John Douglas, who was my mentor in the FBI, after he retired, I assumed his position, and I came back to Utah as a police chief and had the privilege of meeting Mike. And the rest is history.
Thanks, Greg. Dean, tell us a little bit about you.
Well, it's great to be here with you, Mike and Chris and Greg. I'm with Greg every day, so this is pretty much home for us because we spend most of the time every day on Zoom doing the business of the Cold Case Foundation. But I've got kind of an interesting journey to the table. I actually grew up overseas and came to the United States, and my first kind of venture into law enforcement was in the coroner's office, and served as deputy coroner there. But I've done a lot of work over the years with victims' families, in particular stress-related aspects of that, as well as started with some pretty limited, I would say, from my perspective, investigative. But the last I guess we're pushing 7 years now, and numbers of cases, and learn something every day. So I think the best part of my job is the people I get to hang out with and the things I get to learn. So that's a little bit of my background.
That's awesome, Dean. Thanks. Hey, Chris, why don't you welcome a few of our family here that's showing up on the list here, and especially this one here, Greg. I don't know if this face looks familiar, if it's even the right face, but one of your old dispatchers, it looks like.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, 66 Slesher. Thank you so much, Greg. So she says, Greg, hello from one of your old PPD dispatchers. So excited to see you here.
Thank you for joining us.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What else we got, Michael?
So, hey, we've got, Lisa Marie, thank you so much. Katie, Jessica Thompson, Wendy Claire, so many familiar faces or names coming in. Miss Sophia Peggy Johnson. It's just really exciting to see you all coming in, and thank you so much for what you've been doing. We're going to be talking tonight with the director and team of the Cold Case Foundation. This is a group of professionals from investigations, the medical examiner's office, crime scene investigators, psychologists, and psychiatrists who have come together under the direction of Greg and have gone out and around the world. They are looking at unsolved criminal cases. And Chris, I just throw back to you before we ask Greg to kind of lay out what the Cold Case Foundation's about. What something like this would have meant to you as an investigator years ago?
It's invaluable, and I'm honored that both Greg and Dane and yourself and others have even asked me to even participate as part of the investigative team on the CCF show. Folks, tonight you're in for a real treat because this is the real deal. Back in the day, if we would have had these guys and this resource available to us with some of the capers that we were working, it's always amazing to recognize that there's no letter I in the word team. And this is exactly what this organization does. They focus individual skill sets, individual strengths, and all of that focus comes in for the victim and to the victims' families. And they're doing amazing things. And I'm just honored to not only be their friends, but to have an opportunity, to participate. So I'm excited tonight, Michael, Greg, Dane, just to get into this tonight. And, guys, we have a little saying that we say here. We've got a couple of them, but this is one of them that we say when it's going to be a really good, super great show. Code 33, folks. It's coming at you tonight. Code 33, which our family knows. So, Mike, what do you think? Where are we headed here?
Let's get going. Greg, why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about this vision that I know you had for many, many years and the creation of the Cold Case Foundation. Why are you guys doing this?
Well, thanks, Mike. As you know, this has been a discussion that we've had for many, many years, and it really stems from my experience back at the FBI Academy when I was still an agent and working as a profiler and then a supervisor for the VICAP program. Recognizing the only cases that we worked back there were cold cases. There were a handful of current cases, but typically most cases that we had were cold and they were very, very difficult. Recognizing that if we really have a pandemic in this country, and we do in different facets of society, certainly cold cases is one of them. There are probably anywhere between 150 to 250,000 cold case homicides. That's just homicides in our country. And there's a number of reasons for that. But the point being is that there's a lot.
Greg, is that an aggregate number or are you talking annually?
No, it's an estimate aggregate. Annually, we have about 5,500 new cases every year.
Oh,
wow.
Pile on top of that number. And then when you add to that unidentified remains and missing persons, and then sexual assaults, where there appears to be serial characteristics, that's a true pandemic. Those are real serious issues. And the longer these cases go unsolved, of course, you have an offender that's unaccounted for and who is able to continue to commit those crimes. So recognizing that as a serious issue and the lack of resources, whether it be funding or expertise available to law enforcement agencies, and typically the smaller or medium-sized agencies are especially high demand for a number of reasons, we thought, wouldn't it be great if we could provide a service to these agencies where at no cost, we're a nonprofit, 501c3, and don't charge either the victims' families or law enforcement to provide a level of expertise that they just can't get anywhere else. So we approach it from a multidisciplinary perspective. We have right now 75 experts online with us that are on our website, and probably another 60 in application right now who want to come and work with us. As you know, Mike, you and Chris are included in that group of experts. And so when you take a look at the accumulation of years of experience and expertise and skills, abilities, and talents, you accumulate that and you put that together for an agency who has questions about a case, has been looking at a case for years and years. You have the opportunity to talk to people with years of exposure. They get to see it from a whole different perspective, and the chances of providing information that help them with that investigation go up exponentially simply because of that opportunity.
Well, I think too, the other thing that you want to add to that is then all of those people have a Rolodex.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we always talk about is that when people come on board with us, they bring their entire network with them as well. And so if for some reason we can't find it internally, our experience to date has been that if somebody has a specific need, we just let our team know, and inevitably we end up with multiple resources coming back at us and the other thing that's great about that is we don't then need an introduction to go after those resources. One of our team members already has the relationship, so they connect us with them directly. So exponentially, it's amazing what we have at our fingertips.
Fascinating.
It's amazing. Chris?
No, I was going to say, Coop, kind of unwrap what the VICAP is for our audience here, because some people may not be familiar what the VICAP was back in the day, and how it's kind of progressed to where you think it is today, right? You were kind of the tip of the spear on that.
Yeah, VICAP stands for the Violent Criminal Apprehension Program, and it's a national database that is housed at the FBI and under the jurisdiction of the FBI. They manage it. They started it back in the late 80s. Started actually from Pierce Brooks, I believe his name was, a captain over homicide for Los Angeles Police Department. And he was hired by the FBI to come out as the first program manager. The purpose of it was to provide a database of unsolved homicides, missing persons, and unidentified bodies. And the whole function was to determine whether or not among these different cases, was there common offenders responsible for them? So as an agency would submit an unsolved case, they would compare it with all the rest of the database to determine if there were comparable factors, cases that appeared similar in nature. And then we would contact the local law enforcement agencies who had submitted those cases and perform what we referred to as a multi-agency investigative task force to take that to the next level and to support the investigative efforts of that agency to determine whether or not their case may be linked to another case throughout the United States or one that had already been solved and connected to an offender, which may suggest, of course, that offender was also responsible for the case at hand. A good example of that, I think, Mike and Chris, you reviewed the Robert Ben Rhodes case here recently.
Yeah.
A great example of how these offenders will travel around the country. Well, the only way that you can compare cases like Rhodes was involved in at a national basis is to compare it to a national database to see if there's any similar crimes out there that have been submitted by other agencies. He was a truck driver. He traveled all around the country, and come to find out in 1990, 91, he showed up here in Utah. Well, that wasn't known until a presentation that was given at a Chiefs convention where I had the opportunity to review that case in detail to the chiefs and sheriffs in the state of Utah. And while we had the database, those cases that he was responsible for here in Utah had not been submitted to the National Academy.
Yeah, it's fascinating because back in the day, for our viewers here, if we in an agency, we had these forms that you would fill out, and it was basically a checklist, right, Greg? Yeah. And we would mail them to the BAU in Quantico, and these guys would get it, and they would all see if there were similarities. So, Mike, where have we progressed since then, right? I mean, some of the technology and the things that we're learning. It's crazy.
Greg and I actually, I don't know, I guess it's been more than a dozen years ago, Greg. We met with the VICAP team on base in Las Vegas at the Air Force Base, and they were going through some of the challenges of bringing this database together. And I think one of the frustrations that I've had over the years as I've watched VICAP today, especially once 9/11 happened and the focus at the Bureau had to turn so dramatically toward terrorism, that a lot of that information isn't getting in like it was then. And it was always a volunteer program, right, Greg? It was always volunteer from the agencies.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating when you get on today and you see 30 or 40 cases on there of missing persons for the entire year of 2019. And we know that that number is 100,000. And so it makes it today a challenge, because we have to start looking at groups like NamUs and the Jane Doe organization and others to bring this together. And maybe one day through technology, we'll get to the point that we really coalesce it. Dean, what do you find is the biggest challenge for you stepping into this world of managing and bringing together all of these 75 experts and trying to assign out the cases that you guys are picking up each day?
Well, I think one is just being able to get access to the information that we need to really have a case in a position that, we can put a team on it. One of the things that, we have in this country, and it kind of fits a little bit of what you're talking about with VICAP and the voluntary nature of it. In the United States of America, law enforcement, I think, is much more siloed than a lot of people really understand. I mean, even within a state, you can have a lot of things going on in one community and a neighboring community, unless those guys are training together or they're on a task force together, or, something happens, somebody happens to share something, it really kind of functions within that bubble a little bit. And so part of it is being able to gain access to it. And with a lot of our cases, we have, I think the oldest one we've looked at is somewhere in the neighborhood of about 65 years old. But, being able to access the real meat of the case and being able to get that information. Once we've got the case to the point where there's enough to really be looked at, that part really seems to go pretty quick. I mean, when we started the foundation, one of the discussions was, how do we create this organization in a way that we don't have a ton of overhead and we have to, we don't have to go out and raise a bunch of capital. I mean, that's always the issue with any kind of organization, especially nonprofit world, is how do we get the money? And one of the things we looked at was, we said, well, where is the greatest abundance of resources to be able to work these cases? And it's retired law enforcement guys. I mean, people that have tremendous careers. They're great to work with because none of them are trying to get a new position. They've done their work. They're not in competition. They're not afraid of a promotion or, demotion or whatever. They've got a lot of time on their hands. A lot of these guys, they've worked through all the honeydews, and the wife's saying, you need to get something else to do. And so it kind of creates this dynamic. So for us, I don't have a problem getting people onto a case once, we've got enough information to really turn them loose on it. I think where we're at right now is we're really kind of working towards developing more of an area with our analysts. So, one of the analysts that worked with Greg back in Quantico is now on our team and is helping us really kind of organize and lay all of that out. So that then gives us a resource that when a case comes in, we can kind of turn that over to them. They can go through it. They can kind of prioritize it for us, but also identify where the holes are in the case, and gives us a kind of a stepping off point to bring that information in. So
that's fantastic.
That's great. Greg, let's jump in and
let's go.
Tell me a cool story. I mean, tell me one of the cases that's been solved recently. Maybe the Montana case, or give folks an idea of what you're doing.
The Montana case is the Bernhardt case. It's all right to mention that case because it's been adjudicated. It's solved now. That happens to be the first case that we received. We were asked by the agency, Yellowstone County Sheriff's Office, to conduct a crime analysis and an assessment of the personality of the individual that committed the crime. We went through that case and provided what we believe to be personality characteristics of the offender. We talked about how or who was the primary victim, who the obsession was of the offender, how the offender identified the victim. We discussed the concept that most probably the offender either worked with the victim or worked for the victim, meaning that in that particular situation, there were subcontractors, a number of subcontractors that were working in the home. When I say victims, it's actually two victims. It's a husband and wife. But the primary victim here was the wife, and she became the obsession of this particular offender. And we had determined that there were certain things that were taken from the home. The way in which the crime was committed suggested that he took trophies or souvenirs, as we've talked about in cases, and that those souvenirs may have been seen by somebody subsequently through the years. Now, keep in mind, this case was over 45 years old.
Yeah.
And while we were successful in identifying closely the individual that committed the crime, that, as we know, profiling is not the answer to all things. It's simply another tool that can be used to help lead that investigation toward probable types of offenders. Well, in addition, the police, if you can imagine, 45 years ago, DNA was not even an issue. Well, there was DNA that was left on some cigarette butts that had been cast aside in a toilet. And these guys were sharp enough, for whatever reason, to take those cigarette butts and maintain them over the years. And it was DNA was extracted from those. And Dean, you can give the more detailed aspects, technological aspects of that DNA. But the fact of the matter is, it was that DNA that led to the positive identification of the individual that was responsible for the crime. It actually identified two individuals that were related. And come to find out, the individual that committed the crime in this case had been deceased for about 10 years at the time it was solved. Our profile helped them focus their investigation, look at people who she had worked with or had worked for her. And in both cases, not only did she work with the individual, but he'd also come in as a subcontractor to their home because they were just recently building a brand new house. So that's a success. We don't take credit for solving cases. We contribute. We do whatever we are capable of doing. I've never seen a situation where we've not been able to positively contribute to the progression of a case, to move it forward, to take it off zero base, and to help move it down road. And so when you're able to combine all these different techniques, whether it be profiling and DNA and the science and the forensics, it's amazing what you can come up with. And together as a team, we identify the solution to these cases. There's no one individual that's responsible for it. And that's, I think, the strength in our approach as a cold case foundation. We don't attempt to put the spotlight on any one individual or any one particular approach to investigation, but rather the group. And it's a group think. And as effectively as we can, we create a whole new approach to looking at that case. And most of the time come up with some very, very successful results.
Yeah, I think too, the other thing that makes it really unique is that team aspect. I mean, we always talk about this being really a team sport. And I think when you look at cases, a lot of times people will say, well, there were mistakes made on the initial crime scene or the investigation. And, one of the places we always start is if nobody did anything, then there really is nothing to start with. But every little small piece is part of the puzzle. And, there's aspects of it. I mean, those of us that have been working in this field for years, I know even going back to my career, going back to the very beginning and being involved in it, the things that we were doing back then we've changed so much. I mean, we're utilizing techniques and technology. So I don't want people to go back and look at that and say, well, why did you do it that way? We did it that way because that's what we were taught and we were trained and we did it to the best of our ability. But now we have new technology. So as Greg said, sometimes people are hanging on to things for, they're not always quite sure why they're hanging on to it other than it was a piece of evidence. And now technology is now catching up and allowing us to be able to really take it to a whole nother level. In this particular case, it was a combination of the DNA and then working the family tree. And they actually were able to get it down to the familia DNA down to kind of that vein, and then work from there and realize, okay, we've got two possibilities. We've got two brothers, and it was from there that they found out the one brother was deceased, the other one was alive. They did the DNA on that, and then were able to confirm that it wasn't the living brother, but then that left them with the other one. And so, those are kind of some of those dynamics and aspects that we start seeing in these cases. And the other thing I think that's really important is we've tried to really get depth to our teams, not just, so what's really fun is that we have multiple investigators, multiple medical examiners, multiple forensic people, multiple psychologists and people that are looking at it. And so what you really come up with, Greg always uses this term when we're describing it to people, is it's the Mayo Clinic. We instead of getting one specialist over here, you're really taking the case to a team of specialists who are just there saying, well, this is my opinion. And so, we like to have some tension, I guess is a good word, pushing back, people doing it. And we really try to strive to get to the point where everybody's finally in agreement. And, sometimes these things they're not perfect little puzzles that fit together the way you want, but it's that little glitch that actually forces you to the next level to find a new kind of clue that you weren't anticipating. And so sometimes we'll walk away, and I know we did one here a while back, and we must have had, I told Greg, we got to looking at it, I think we had something like 15 people involved in it. And I was just running the numbers. If we had gone out and hired all of these people at the rates that they normally charge, just that consult, which was, we did during a day, would have probably been into the $15,000 to $20,000 just to pay for those people to be there. And here's all these people sitting around the table. And, when you do that, you start finding these dynamics of people really kind of feeding off of each other in real time. And I know, Chris, you've been in on them with us. And I tell people all the time, I walk away with kind of two feelings every time I leave one of these reviews. And the first feeling is, I cannot believe how much stuff I learned today from these people. They're just unbelievable. And the second thing I walk away with is, this has been fun. I had a blast. I'm looking forward to the next time to do it. So, I think all of those dynamics and that interplay is really kind of a unique aspect. People say, well, I know this group over here, they have a lot of people, but normally what happens in a lot of departments is it goes from one person, then there's a time delay. And so this is happening in real time.
So let's bring up our audience up to speed here of who we have on guest here. We've got Mr. Greg Cooper and Dean Jackson from the Cold Case Foundation. Greg's pedigree is just phenomenal. He's a protege of John Douglas, who actually wrote the book Mindhunter. They set the show after him. Mike and Greg have been in the arena for 30 plus years, working, in every, I mean, you two have traveled to Egypt together. You've gone around the world. You've really done some amazing stuff. But I think one of the things that's, just kind of keep the flow moving here tonight is, well, I think we're going to get a lot of questions about family members who may have, maybe a family member who was a victim of a violent crime of some sort. What we want to say to them, right, Greg and Dean, let's point them to their agency if that case has gone cold, and have that agency reach out to the Cold Case Foundation. That's the correct protocol, right?
That is the best scenario for us. Yeah.
Okay. And that way there going to be an assessment, and then from there, you can that agency can utilize the services of the 501c3, which is a nonprofit cold case foundation, and that's what we're talking about tonight. How long does it take for a case to go cold?
Yeah, and I've been looking forward to this because this is something that Snap and Crayons also brought up, is how long is a cold case cold? And I happened to find this picture of two guys when we were boys.
I still have the same amount of hair. You've got less, though, Mike.
Where'd that one come from? Where did that one come from? That was King Tut. That's King Tut.
On King Tut. So, folks, you're looking at the X-rays of King Tut. And Greg, why don't you take that? I mean, this is our tongue-in-cheek way of saying how cold can a cold case be? And whenever McDonough gets a little cocky about all the cases he's solved, Greg, I go right back to our back, which is, how old was it? But go ahead.
I think that's a great intro to how special we are, Mike. Of course, it's an opinion. It's merely an opinion, and we're certainly open to changing that opinion if additional evidence was ever presented to us that would convince us otherwise. But the King Tut case was at least 3,000 years old, maybe 3,300 years old.
Yep.
I think that's the coldest case in history that's been solved, as far as we're concerned.
We still own it.
Now, were you guys working when this actually happened, or?
No, they weren't working. They were having a party. They're calling every couple of days. What are you guys doing in the States? We don't know. Where are you? Are you getting robbed in Egypt?
There's our book.
Well, Mike and I had the opportunity.
Yeah, we ought to just take a second, Greg, and go off on a wild tangent here for a second. When that happened, and Greg and I thought, as Discovery Channel said, we'd like you to look at this case. We thought, and I think it was your words initially, Greg, you said, well, in order for us to vicariously roll in the dirt, we're going to have the best experts in the world, and we're going to need to spend months, if it takes that, in Egypt, traveling everywhere that this young pharaoh would have gone. And by golly, Chris, they bought off on that.
It's just well, I remember you guys calling and saying, hey, there's a bunch of dead gals in Juarez. Do you want to go to Mexico? And I'm like, have you guys lost your mind? I'm not going down. Remember that?
Well, when we went, which was November of 2001, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you recall, that's 2 months after 9/11.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And they almost canceled that trip for us because of the level of danger that existed over there in the Middle East, with the perception that it was a terrorist attack upon the United States. And to what degree would that expose us to danger? What risk level would that put us at? And so they almost canceled it. And fortunately, they did not. So it was a dangerous situation when we went over there. But what an experience. We did. We convinced them that, look, we have to recreate this crime. We have to go to the crime scene, to the disposal site. We have to talk to the witnesses, which would incorporate witnesses from even a professional perspective, the experts who could help interpret the hieroglyphics for us. Because we had to look at all the behavior. We had to look at the physical behavior, the criminal behavior, the written behavior that was available. We had to look at the different personalities. And I think we fairly identified 4 good suspects and whittled those down to the most probable offender. And I'm still convinced we were right. There may be some that take issue with that, but hey, prove otherwise.
Well, it got an Emmy. It was the #1 running show on Discovery.
Chris, you've teed me up once more.
There it is. Bingo. There it is. Won an Emmy. How about that?
Two boys on vacation.
There it is. There they
I don't know
are.
about you, Chris, but I'm thinking I believe it was in 2001. That's been a few years ago.
Yeah, they look great.
Well, the interesting thing, Chris, about that, and Greg, maybe we could talk about this for a second. is, when you look at these cold cases, you no longer really think you have the emotion of the event. You're not smelling the smells of a violent crime scene or the talking to the offender or the victims and sensing all of that emotion that comes with those investigations. But I remember very clearly, Greg, we began to feel those emotions as we looked into it. And one night, Greg and I had the opportunity to go in deep into the Egyptian earth, into a place of King Tut's father, a man named Akhenaten, into his tomb. And if you think of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom and the big round rock, and we were down in the bottom of this tomb where it had not been opened in over 100 years, I believe, Greg, when we went in there. There were still pieces of pottery, there were artifacts, there were bones, and as we were there with the antiquities director for the area of Minya. And we started asking him about Tut's death. And something really amazing happened. Greg, why don't you take it from there?
No, I want to hear it from your lips.
Well, maybe I've thrown you a curveball, but as we spoke, the director, it turned into an interview that turned into an interrogation of someone 3,000 years later, based on the way that the Egyptian government under President Mubarak had stupefied all of the truth to protect Mubarak and his family, who he believed would take over the throne. And our interview turned into an interrogation. Do you remember that, Greg?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was amazing. And as part of that, there was also kind of a revelation as to who one of our primary suspect was, and the role that the dual role he had played both politically as well as religiously. You remember that discussion? That as a result of that, it gave an excellent, and it underscored the motivation for the crime that we had identified. That as a result of the changes that Tut had incorporated, this particular individual, who happened to be the vice premier, and Tut's right-hand man, who was also his father's right-hand man, is his name, that with Tut's changes, he lost not only his political clout, but also the religious role that he was playing at the time. And in order to maintain that position of power and control over the Egyptian people, the biggest obstacle that he had was Tut, and in fact, Tut's wife.
Wow.
And how often does power and control come into motivators?
Unbelievable. And Steve Martin made a song out of it. We're seeing all the comments over here from everybody. And by the way, thank you everybody tonight. Those of you who have joined us as our family, and to our family who've donated up here tonight, we're grateful. Hit that subscribe button, hit the buttons, and share it with everybody. And hopefully you'll see that there's no other channel out there right now that can bring this type of quality to you. And we're hoping that you're enjoying it, because these guys here are the real deal. I mean, Greg, and Mike, they're going to want to hear about some death row stuff. There's got to be some death row stuff out here because
that would be interesting. Greg and I actually had the distinct honor of traveling throughout the United States, interviewing predators who selected elderly victims to sexually assault and murder. And they had to have multiple victims, multiple murders under their belt in order to do that. And we went into some of the most amazing prisons, especially up in the Finger Lakes area. Greg, I don't know, why don't you talk a little bit about that study and why that was so important to the law enforcement community that we do that?
Yeah, that was really fascinating. Among the many adventures that we went on, we interviewed, I think it was 10, wasn't it 10 offenders all together in different penitentiaries throughout the New York area, state of New York and surrounding areas. What we were trying to determine, we were asked to participate in a Department of Justice study along with Ann Burgess and the Boston College that she worked with at the time and still does. And we were asked to determine, try to make a determination based upon those people that we interviewed, because each one of them had been convicted of murdering elderly females, which I think in each case there was a sexual assault involved as well. And we were trying to determine whether or not we were coming upon another type of a sexual fetish, and that was there a particular sexual interest that these offenders had for that particular type of victim? Was there a preference for that type of victim? And we had the opportunity to interview each one of these individuals. And as I recall, each one of them separately is pretty dramatic. But one of the experiences I remember, Mike, as we talked to this one particular guy, that actually told us that if he wanted to, he could easily get up from his chair, come across that table, and probably kill either Mike and I if he wanted to. And of course, you remember, Mike, what happened with that? What you told him?
Well, I don't. But you tell me, and then I'll remember. I'll take you back because this is what two old guys do when they get together.
Okay, wait. Let's qualify this for our audience because they think we're crazy right now that we're laughing at a serial killer that would have come across the table and whack both of you. So, let's just put this into context.
Mike's response was, well, you might get one of us, but by the time you finish that one, the other one's going to kill you.
Yeah, I only have to run faster than the bear. I love it. So what happened? What happened? How did it go? How did it roll?
Yeah, Mike, what did you find out about that? Oh. He decided to think twice about it, didn't he?
And that guy really was. He was a dangerous, obviously, a dangerous criminal. But this was the guy, if I remember right, Greg, that after he murdered his victims, he liked to light fires, but he ended up burning down an entire apartment complex and killing everyone in this high rise.
Yeah.
So he was a horrid offender, and. It was crazy. And the thing I remember most about that morning, though, was we were late getting to the prison.
Oh.
And Coop had a Coke and a donut. That's hard for you to believe, folks, that cops would eat that way.
Cop wheels.
And I was driving with a Coke in one hand, and we came onto an on-ramp, and I was driving a little too fast for existing conditions. And we went off the road and down into the borrow pit, and I just kind of kept driving and powered through and got up onto the freeway. And the whole time, Greg was just kind of stabilizing his drink. We got up onto the freeway, and I looked over, and he took a sip, and we never said a word. We just...
That's fun.
Great stories, and we're still making them up.
Yeah. So, Greg, you have been kind enough to put Chris and me to work on the Cold Case Foundation. You've got Chris actually working a couple of cases right now. What's going on there?
Yeah, Chris has functioned both as an investigative consultant on cases, but he's also an investigative lead, which is there's a big significant case that he's in charge of right now, working with us. Go ahead, Chris. Tell us what you can about it, anyway.
Yeah, well, it's being sensitive because it's still ongoing. It's it's a caper out of Texas. I won't name any of the cities or anything like that, but it's two people, two victims, and it's a horrendous crime scene. So we just started to kick that off, and most recently we worked on some other stuff. Greg, Dean, that you guys brought me in on, and for our audience as a whole, I mean, I think they don't realize that, this is kind of what we do, right?
Yeah.
And it's in our blood. It's all we know. And so we're just grateful to give back, in the ways that we can right now. And we're hoping that we can really help. And TikTok, thank you so much. We're grateful for you. So anyway, that's a couple of the things you guys got me doing. I hope I make you proud. And I'm grateful to always, I have to also say, well, I got a couple of seconds here. I've been in the classroom with these guys for a very long time. And, Mike and Coop would come in and teach the behavioral aspects. And then I would come in the practical application on days 2, 2.5, and 3, right? I'd work with the investigators and kind of teach them, what to look for in relationship to the whys versus the hows. And we've had some great success. I mean, over the years, just as a group here. And so I'm honored just to be your friend and not only as a friend, but, personally and professionally. It's been a great ride. And, what we're learning, guys, Coop, Dean, is what Mike and I are learning here. And Mike, correct me if I'm wrong, but the folks that are watching us are really smart. And we are getting ideas and tips and things that are flowing this way about active investigations going on around the country today. I've got to say there was some bones found in Colorado about the Morphew case. Guys, we don't know yet. I want to put that in the environment right now. Nobody knows, but we've got some things moving. You're not going to want to miss Monday. We've got a great show coming up on Monday. We're not going to tip our hat yet what it's going to be, but
hey, what do we call that, Chris? Tell Coop.
I'll let you tell because you came up with the idea. It's beautiful. You got to listen to this.
So Greg Dean, we call Monday nights choir practice.
Yeah. Choir.
And Avalon Apples, thank you so much. And Grace, Naomi, thank you. This is probably a really good time to talk a little bit about your mission and the fact, Greg, we've been looking at a number of cases, mostly homicide cases, but one that we've been kind of intrigued with is this case that's going on in Colorado. It's just west of Colorado City, Colorado Springs. But this morning, as we were getting ready for the show today, or actually this afternoon, I thought it would be interesting for everyone to just see a map of all of the cold cases that are going on in Colorado right now. And I wanted to put them in here to ask you a specific question. So there are currently today 1,790 cold cases, with the majority of those being homicides and missing persons. Talk about the complexity in regard to how the Cold Case Foundation tries to work with these departments. I think Chris kind of tipped the hand to that a little bit. And then Dean, I'd like you to maybe pick it up and just remind people how they can reach out and talk to people. And folks, this will be posted up later. We'll put a link down below. Those in the members area, you got this earlier today to look at and give us your thoughts on. But it's just a simple little view that goes in and looks at whether they're missing or which city they were missing from, where the case originated, whether it's a homicide, all of that information. And just, again, a fun place for people to be able to go and get a little bit of information. But Greg, talk about the problem kind of holistically. And we're talking 2,000 cases in the state of Colorado. And we have 50 states, and the reality of really what most probably is out there in case numbers.
Yeah, you multiply that across the country, and then you imagine that those that we know about are represented only by the cases that have been actually reported as homicide, right? There's a number of cases out there, missing persons, for example, or unidentified remains. We can presume that includes a number of those cases are also homicide cases, but they can't be classified or reported as homicide cases unless there's convincing evidence, and typically forensic evidence, in order to conclude that and then report it as such. So what you're looking at there is still just a surface level, the first layer of potential victims as a result of that. And you notice how they were scattered across the state. Of course, we try to link cases based upon the behavioral aspect to determine if you have a common offender. You look at the behavior. We as we talked about and have taught for years, Mike, the concept of the 10 filters of profiling. That becomes a model that we use to analyze and assess these cases to determine commonalities between each of those different filters. The first of all being victimology, for example. Right? You taught that, I think, one of the first episodes that you had, Mike, very, very well. And along with that concept, not only does it help if you understand the victimology, it doesn't only help the investigator to determine the probabilities of who an offender might be, but it also, by going into the deep depth of victimology, you can also provide insights to the public and educate the public as to what they do, we do, all of us do, innocently, ignorantly, that contribute to our own victimization. I know that's not a very popular reference or term, because we're not trying to assign blame. We're simply trying to identify those factors that contribute to the commission of that crime and the commission of the individual, the offender who has identified that victim and committed the crime against the victim. But as we go through that process, we're trying to determine which of those cases may be common, have a common offender involved. And then you look at the time frame when the case was committed from a temporal perspective, and then the geographical aspect. And when you include the behavior, the geography, meaning the location, and the temporal aspect, the timing in which those crimes have been committed, and you go through the 10 filters, you get a pretty good sense as to which of those crimes could have been committed by the same offender. The problem, of course, as we know with serial offenders, is that they're mobile. They are on the run all the time, at least for a portion of their lifestyle, whether it be professionally, like truck drivers, in the case where you have a truck driver. And don't misunderstand, audience. I don't want the audience to sense that we're making a statement about truck drivers. Thank the Lord for truck drivers. What would have kept this country going for the last several months about truck drivers? So thank you. It's those truck drivers, like in any profession, we have exceptions to the rule. And in this particular case, because of the mobility nature of that job, sometimes it lends to certain personality characteristics of a certain type of an offender. So it makes it very difficult to solve these crimes because if they're not organized into one database to compare, and you don't have the different jurisdictions working those cases and discussing those cases together, identifying commonalities, what do you have? You've got a bunch of cases out there that are unsolved. And I think that is one of the main contributing factors to this level of unsolvability that we have throughout the country. The lack of communication, cooperation, and coordination between law enforcement agencies and specifically detectives, especially, who are working these cases within their own venues.
Hey, Greg, go ahead and talk for a second because I think it fits right into what you're talking about. But I think sometimes people think that the profiling concept is really just focused towards trying to profile serial killers. And talk a little bit about just the value, because I think, we use that profiling technique on cases that don't involve. In fact, the majority probably of cases of these homicides, or at least a large portion of them, are not going to be serial offenders, but how that applies a little bit.
Yeah. And Greg, as you do that, I want you to just pay attention to this chart real quickly in this number right here in the lower corner. This is the number of children in Colorado last year that disappeared and have not been located. So
where's that number, Mike? Which one is it?
8191, 8,191.
Wow.
So the problem is huge.
Yeah. Well, it is huge. As we've already referenced, this is truly a pandemic, isn't it? And that's just one aspect, missing children. Now, many of those children have been abducted by their own parent,
Yeah.
and you've got a broken family involved in that situation, or divorce. But to address Dean's point, I think it's really important to understand that profiling is simply the systematic analysis of behavior. It's not primarily intended to link cases together. It is primarily intended to understand the personality of the offender. And by doing so, it helps lead the investigation and investigator to identify potential probable offender types, personality types. So as they begin to identify suspects, the more they understand the personality of the offender, the more they start to focus on the most probable individuals within that pool of suspects. So it helps from an investigative perspective of identifying suspects. And then also it helps from an interview interrogation approach as well, doesn't it? The more you understand the personality, the better you prepare to approach that personality in an interview and an interrogation setting. So investigatively, also from a prosecutive perspective, prosecutors, the more they understand the personality of the offender, the better they can prepare a prosecutive strategy that's going to work effectively for that individual as well. So it applies across the board. And most of the time, I'd say probably 85, 90% of the time, we're applying the techniques of profiling for individual cases. They're not necessarily serial in nature. But as a result of applying those techniques, we can identify probable serial cases and serial offenders based upon the behavior at the crime scene.
That's great. Hey, Dean, why don't you take that question that's popped up on the screen?
Sure. The question is, how do we decide which cases that we can support? I think as kind of fundamentally, we start with the premise, if we can, we want to give something to every case. So, I mean, as far as when we get something, we really do try to give it a good look to see if there's something that we can do immediately for it. Typically, it boils down to a couple of things. One, as I said earlier, is information, the availability of information. So, we may start somewhere, and what we're basically saying, and it depends upon how it comes to us. So right now, we get cases from one of three areas, primarily between law enforcement and victims' families. And then every once in a while, we'll have a attorney contact us on an innocence project. But predominantly, it's those two. So assuming that it's with law enforcement, then sometimes it's a matter of determining what testing and things needs to be done. And then it's a matter of, do we have that resource available? A lot of times what we're finding around the country is, unfortunate as it is, and I think maybe people see this right now, even what's happening in our country politically, it's sometimes easy for people to disconnect if it's not in your backyard. So what we found, it's harder to raise funding for a case in New Mexico when from people in other parts of the country. So part of that is kind of, focusing in on that area and saying, well, this is a need that we have. Maybe it needs more testing. We do have a case right now in New Mexico, for example, that, one of the aspects that we're looking at is we really need people to be on the ground and do some footwork there. The department is small enough that they just don't have the resources. So, what limits us in moving forward is we just don't have the funds allocated to do that particular piece of it. So one of the things we do try to assure our families is that, we don't close cases. What we do is we keep them open. We're constantly trying to look at them. I think one of the things that's interesting about what Greg and I do regularly is we're bringing new people on and seeing new talents. A lot of times we'll throw cases back at people just saying, hey, have you seen anything like this in your career? And so at that moment, you're getting now a new, fresh set of eyes for somebody to say, well, have you thought about this? Or have you guys looked at this possible resource? And I think that's the other thing that we try to bring to the table is best practices and sharing that information with agencies. So it really is a case by case and a resource. So when those two things come together, we feel like we've got enough information and we feel like we have the resources. we're gonna move forward on it as far as we can, and realize that we're one of the pieces in the overall piece. We're not, we aren't going to probably take it from start to finish, but we're going to play a part in that particular case.
But ideally, the cooperation of the agency who has the venue over that case is of primal consideration. It's absolutely pivotal if we're going to be able to review the case and provide the type of service that can be effective. You have to have a partnership between us and the local agency. And we've worked with law enforcement agencies, and we've worked with victims, and ideally, because the legal jurisdiction still falls on the shoulders of that law enforcement agency. And it's really up to them as to whether or not, number one, do they need the resource? Do they want the resource? And are they willing to consider outside resources? Because there are some agencies out there, unfortunately, that actually have policies that they won't even reach out beyond their own department to consider outside resources.
One of the things that I was going to say this, one of the things we always tell the families too is that there's really 4 phases to this. One is everybody wants to know who did it, right? And I mean, that seems to be kind of this piece, but helping them understand that that's just for phase 1. Phase 2 is, can we get enough evidence for there to be an arrest? Phase 3 is, can we get them convicted in a court of law? And phase 4 is keeping them in prison. So there have been some occasions where we've actually come back in and done risk assessments on people who are possibly going to be released as well. But so it's really seeing it as an overarching thing. Sorry to cut you off there, Mike.
No. I'm glad you brought that up. I saw something that just went by quickly in the chat box, and I wanted to make mention of it. And that was a question about all of the hoopla around Wayfair allegedly trafficking children and other things. If you go back and watch our interview last week with Operation Underground Railroad, they speak to those and caution us to really be careful about buying a lot of those ghost stories until there's more evidence that's in line to support that. But this question about NecroSearch, are you guys working at all with NecroSearch? It's a group that goes out and volunteers for law enforcement, helps on clandestine graves, I think they call it, but basically hidden graves.
We have not worked with that particular organization. We do have associate and partnership programs and what would you call, I guess, a partnership that we have with FIDE, Canaan, what's that called?
FIDE Canaan Cold Case, which they provide us with cadaver dogs at their own expense. They'll fly anywhere in the country. Yeah,
so we work with them very closely on a number of cases.
One of the
side. Oh, go ahead, Chris. Sorry.
No, that's all right, Mike. One of the things that we're seeing a lot here about kids and stuff, right? That's always scary stuff, but I think we need to qualify that. Mike and Greg, I think you guys and Dean, I think we pointed out a little bit, ago that a lot of that is, family situations, right? Domestic scenarios that go sideways, that one of the parents takes the kids and they're reported as being missing. So some of that statistics, however, the other side of that, are actual kids that go missing, which is about between 6 and maybe 10%, maybe, across the country, I mean, statistically. But one of the interesting things I think...
you got to include, though, the at-risk runaway.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is a huge piece of that pie.
Yeah, no, absolutely, 100%. But one of the other things I think that parents and friends and grandparents and us, I mean, we all have kids and grandkids, right? There was a phenomena that took place, and it's called the internet. And the internet occurred in 1993. The first picture that was ever exchanged across the wire was 1995. Okay, and there was an uptick of sexual deviant behavior that went from the streets to the chat room. And that changed the dynamic of how these predators prey. You're always going to have the at-risk, individuals that are working at 2-3 o'clock in the morning to support drug habits. But at the same time, the predator realized that happened. And what was most interesting about that, and you guys, whoever wants to take this, explain some of the intellectual dynamics that took place once that shift went this way, and Catch a Predator came out. You got doctors, lawyers, brain surgeons, etc. What happened to that guy that could not compete for that victimology? I want to lay that out there. And who wants to grab that? Mike, Greg, what do you think? What's your opinion on where'd that guy go who couldn't compete with that doctor and lawyer? And is that an uptick in the problem that we're seeing today?
I can take a little effort here and just share you a couple thoughts. You've got different levels of offenders, different personality types of offenders, and you're talking about with the doctors and lawyers and the white collar offender, if you will.
Yeah,
it's typically a varying level of intelligence as well. These individuals are much more organized. They're very professional in their public lives and to some degree in their personal lives. In fact, many of them, it's always a surprise. Once it's been disclosed what they've been involved in, anybody that knows them can hardly believe it. No way, it couldn't have been Joe Schmo next door. And that's because they are so organized. They're very intelligent. They're fastidious in the way in which they plan out their crimes and the approaches that they use. They're technologically adept, very sophisticated, versus the guy that walks in the park and he abducts a child right off of the swing and leaves. That's a whole different type of a personality that you're dealing with. And so, like you said, what happens for that individual that doesn't have that level of ability to be so sophisticated and lure the children to them? Mike and I had the opportunity to investigate and interview a guy in the Utah prison system that was a very intelligent guy and used Mike can touch on the grooming tactics that he used in order to reach these children, but it was before the computer industry. But those people that don't necessarily have that ability and don't have that level of intelligence, they still have the same keen drive and desire and sexual interest. The pedophile, I suppose who you're talking about, Chris.
Yep. Yeah.
And the pedophile,
but the deviant pedophile, right, Greg? I mean, and Mike, I mean, who build that behavior up, right? It kind of walk them through, the difference there, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Well, the pedophile, I think it's important for the audience to understand that a true pedophile not only is primarily but exclusively interested in children.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now there may be varying ages, different ages that they're interested in, but there is no sexual interest beyond children. And when I say children, technically it's anybody under 18 years old, but generally adolescents and below, with some teenage effect as well. But it's an exclusive interest, and compared to the individual that will take a child but has a preference for a different type of victim. He may have a preference for a college student, female college student, but because of the situation, the environment, or circumstances, it doesn't lend to the opportunity. He's going to go ahead and take advantage of whatever opportunity that comes. It's like an individual that's addicted to a drug. Eventually, it's got to be satisfied in some way, shape, or form. They're going to take whatever's available to them. Ted Bundy, let's take Ted Bundy, for example. We know what he's a guy that's been around and talked about for many, many years, but we know that his primary interest was college co-eds. That was his preferred victim. But who was the last victim that he was convicted of? 12-year-old Kimberly Leach.
Yeah, right.
And we believe that there are many other child victims that he was responsible for, but that was not his primary victim. So we wouldn't refer to him as a pedophile. That was a child, was a victim of opportunity. But these individuals you're talking about are exclusively focused and oriented on children, and they go to great lengths, sophisticated lengths, to identify the victim, make the approach to the victim, while reducing the likelihood of their own exposure all the time. And so it becomes very difficult, particularly in today's technology. That's why we have so many law enforcement task forces that are working within technology. These guys are experts in what they're doing, and they have to place themselves vicariously in the shoes of both victims and the offender in order to lure the offender toward them and approach them as a potential victim. I don't know if that answers your question.
Oh, yeah, no, it absolutely does. And you know, Mike, I mean, we saw some of that the other night with some of the guys we had on, and you know, to Greg's point, some of the impact that, you know, it has on their individual lives. I mean, Greg, you got to go see this, the Operation Underground Railroad. These guys, you know, they're doing exactly what you said, and they're taking it home at night, right?
Sure.
And you know, these are the real heroes.
We have had the opportunity to visit with them a few years ago when we first got started, and really applaud their efforts. They're doing a great job out there.
Yeah,
And,
they're heroes.
We're aware of them. They're doing a great job. Yeah.
Yeah. Mike, what do you think? You have anything to add, dovetailing to what Greg was saying?
No, I mean, it becomes such a complex thing. We could probably spend an entire show talking about each of these predatory behaviors. And really, maybe that's what we ought to do sometime, Greg, is just have you back, and we'll dig into those a little further, and we'll talk about some of the behavioral characteristics of different kinds of offenders. Especially, I think something that would be of interest is when we talk about the different types of rapists that there are, and that may really be insightful for people. But what I wanted to kind of switch our gears toward is a discussion about how this amazing user community that we have started to get to know, how much they can help us. We talked about recently, we had on the folks from Trace Labs who are doing dark web searches, and it's just a bunch of people in their homes all around the world that are looking for missing persons on the dark web, and then providing packets of information to law enforcement. Chris and I instituted a little program here on Profiling Evil about a month ago that's just turning out to be an amazing benefit. We call it the evidence room, Greg. And Chris, why don't you touch on what the evidence room is? But then what I'd like, Dean, maybe you to chat about is how an organization like yours could leverage something like the evidence room, or this huge pool of true crime fighters that are out there that are just spending some time looking on the web and listening to things. Just today, I got an email from one of our listeners who sent a valuable piece of information found in the middle of a conversation on one of the cases that we're looking at, in the middle of an hour-long YouTube thing. I would have never listened through that whole thing, but they went out and found that little golden nugget. A few weeks ago, we had someone on the Daybell case in Idaho send us, they went through hours and hours of video CCTV footage in Yellowstone Park and found the suspect and these children in the park, and gave us photographs of those individuals. But Chris, talk about the evidence room, and then let's hand it to Dean for a minute.
Yeah. So in a nutshell, guys, what this is, you know, Mike and I, we saw, you know, quite frankly, we just saw how smart people were, and they were coming up with all of these clues. There's just so many great people, you know, we call them family now, but just, you know, just web sleuths. There's all these really smart people that are connecting dots, but they had no place to go. And so we created this resource for them to kind of plug this information in, you know, with obviously the first caveat, if it's a, you know, a critical piece of evidence and it's emergency, they're to call 911 and or the agency first. Okay. And if they had something that they think may be connected, they plug it into the evidence room, and then we can kind of qualify it and send it off to the agency if it looks like it's a viable lead. We are also encouraging people to go to your site, obviously, but use the evidence room too, maybe show that's something that you guys could, utilize as a resource, with us to help you, drive some of the, leads in some of the cold cases that you guys are working. So that's it in a nutshell. Dean, what do you think?
I think, when you kind of look at it at least at the 30,000 foot level for us, we've been slowly but surely putting these pieces in place
Sure.
with kind of this long-term goal in mind. And one of the exciting things for us right now is that we're in the process of putting together a whole new side to the Cold Case Foundation, that if people can kind of monitor, especially our Instagram, our Facebook, and our Twitter accounts, the information will be coming out as to what we're getting ready to launch there. And I think it'll be both an interactive aspect to it, but it'll also give people a chance to support the Cold Case Foundation in some unique ways. And part of that, that we're looking at even is some educational opportunities for people. Greg touched on this earlier. We want to be able to help people and give them the tools at different levels to be able to participate in things. I think one of the things that we all know is that, wanting to do something and having a desire to do something and having a passion to do something is amazing. And that keeps you engaged and keeps you there. But, cutting down a tree with just a handsaw is a lot of hard work. And if you can learn how to use a chainsaw and learn how to use it well, and of course now they've got all kinds of equipment and different things. So a lot of it is really understanding how all of these pieces of equipment interconnect with each other, and also understanding how, when you're talking about certain pieces of information, I know, for example, one of the areas that just comes to mind that requires tons of work. We talk a lot about DNA, and we talk about, being able to go out, run the lab test, find the DNA. But that's not the end of the story. In a lot of these cases, genealogy work has to be done, and it's very laborious, and it takes an immense amount of time, to go through all of those records and find those little tiny little indicators. And, there's a case out of Idaho that, we kind of point to every once in a while because it's kind of got all these pieces that are involved in, and we've kind of slid in and out of it at different points. One of our team members was brought in because it was originally an innocence project, and the DNA work and everything that was done there actually got somebody who'd been in prison for 20 years out of prison. We then got involved, did a profile, told them where we thought, this thing needed to go. Greg just did an amazing job with that. But then it came down to DNA and the DNA. And I'll be honest with you, when I was watching it, it's not my field. I'm trying to learn as much as I can. And I just felt like we ran into this incredible brick wall on DNA, because it was like, this should work and it's not there. And what's the problem? But what it needed was somebody to take that bit of information and now get into all of the archives and really work it from a genealogical perspective. And sure enough, they were able to identify who the person was, and it was exactly fit the profile that Greg had done. So I think there are different places for people to plug in. What we always say when people reach out to us is we really need to understand what their talents, expertise are. And then we can find ways to try to plug them into various levels.
Yeah, great point. Great point. And we see that Andy Crayons, this is kind of what we were saying a moment ago, that, those numbers are high, but there's a small percentage, probably 4 or 5%. And it looks like it comes right out to what she's saying here. So thank you, Andy, for also grabbing that. A lot of these non-suspicious deaths put these kids at high risk because a lot of runaways, what Mike was saying a little bit. But thank you very much. We're always grateful for you guys, keeping us in check and keeping the focus on the right information. And we got to give a shout out to Dr. L. Thank you. She's awesome. This is great stuff. Great stuff. What can we say? We had new members come in tonight as well. We had a lot of people. So Mike, we got some time here because I know you got a crunch, but I think we need to open up maybe a rapid Q&A for Greg and Dean and to, hit some questions here. So maybe we can start hitting up some questions that will come at us here. Are you guys good with that, Mike? You okay with that?
Yep.
All right. So let's see what we got here. I'm going to go right through here. Let's see here. I want dinner.
Well, we're waiting for a few of those to come in. You and I had the chance, I think it's been about 2 years ago, to look into a serial killer case in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And one of the things that we did in that investigation was we were able to look at where the bodies were buried and where bodies were displaced by natural events, like in one case, floodwaters that had displaced some of the bones that we discovered. But we also took ground sensing radar up onto the hillside. Maybe you can talk about, because with this case in Colorado, there are a lot of questions around an FBI search warrant that was conducted, a large slab of concrete. Just maybe talk a little bit about ground sensing radar, and then we'll let these questions come in and move on with questions as they pop up.
You asked me, Mike?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Is there anybody else named Greg Cooper on this panel?
I'm delaying. I'm delaying. Mike and I had the opportunity a couple years to go to New Mexico, right outside of, it was in Albuquerque, and work a case of a number, at that time, it was a high risk population of victims, some prostitutes. And as I recall it, Mike, they ended up with finally one who we thought was a very good suspect. And one of this suspect had a line of sight from his mobile home.
Yeah, that's right.
Of that burial site, which was within a mile and even 2 miles out, right? and we felt very confident that this guy was really a strong possibility. But the problem was, of course, that he was deceased at the time. Do you remember why he was deceased?
I believe someone that he picked up, the boyfriend tuned him up and killed him, didn't he?
It was the John. It was the John, who brought her over to his place. And he was out there waiting for him. And he actually, the suspect brought out the victim after he had already killed her. And the John was waiting outside for her to come out.
That's right. He had her rolled up in the carpeting.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
All right, we got questions, Chris.
There you go, Mike. Go. How much does your gut instinct play in catching perps? Who wants to answer it?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I think it's something that I like to refer to when we talk about victimology. This concept we refer to as the voice. I think we've all had that experience where we've had an impression, an instinct, a gut instinct, intuition, whatever you want to call it, that we either should or shouldn't do something. We should or shouldn't pursue something, as in the case of an investigation, or look at somebody. And it applies across the board, doesn't it? Even when you're sitting in an interview interrogation, you can have one of those aha moments where if I use this approach, I can recall 1 year ago where I just decided there's a thought that occurred to me. I need to give this guy a candy bar and treat him at that level of immaturity that he was. And it worked. I gave him the candy bar and the guy gave it all up. Now, who would have thought of something like that? It was just one of those thoughts. There was no rational or necessarily logical decision-making process in it, but it was an idea that came, and I thought, well, I've got nothing to lose because I'm not getting any further with him right now. And he gave it up. Well, who would have thought that, the candy bar is going to make all the difference, right?
That's awesome. Mike?
Cheated no more. Thank you so much. A deceased family member that you think might have been a killer, go to your local police department, share with them all of the information. They would love to be able to look at that and see if it would help clear up a case, and it would certainly bring peace to a family that has probably really wondered over the years. There was a question about what do you do, or have you done anything with projects like the Innocence Project, where you've gone and looked at cases where someone's already in prison? Dean, if you could hit that real quickly. And then Chris, why don't you take how do cases affect your mental health?
I knew you'd ask me on that one.
Do we get to talk about how it affects his mental health? Or no, I think to date we've probably, I want to say probably have had 5 or 6 cases that would fall into an Innocence Project kind of vein. We try to be real sensitive to that. But typically before we've gotten involved, there's been a whole ton of work that's been done and evidence brought forward. And, you're kind of taking a look at that and going through that and really making sure all the I's have been dotted and everything. So we've reviewed some. I wouldn't say that it's by no means is it, kind of our bread and butter, but we don't, turn a blind eye to it. I mean, and as I mentioned, we've got one case that our first avenue into that was through the Innocence Project, and it's come full circle around. Because you get the wrong person in and even get them back out of prison, you still have the person who did the crime. And and that, I think that's one other thing I'd just throw out here to people. We hear a lot of times from people saying, well, these are old cases. We realize you want to solve them, but they're not as pressing. And one of the things I always remind people is that a lot of these people, Greg always uses this terminology: past behavior is a predictor of future behavior. And so we don't see it as just solving, we see it as preventing. And so there are a lot of cases where if this person can be taken off the streets and out of, and a lot of times I think what motivates me is just realizing these are people I don't want interacting with my family, with my children, with my grandchildren. And so what we can do to keep our community safer.
Awesome. Thank you. So Jen H., how do these cases affect your mental health, and what steps do you guys take to stay sane? Yes, you've said it correctly. And so here's the key: hang out with hoodlums like this. Okay. You notice there's a lot of humor that's going on in this group. I think every one of us, God's given us each a gift to not only compartmentalize, but to process the good things in life. And we try to stay focused on the good things in life. And sometimes it's difficult. I think each one of us on this panel would admit it. But we also recognize there's a small percentage doing really bad things in the world. And just wake up every morning and say, I can do this, and I can do it with a positive mental attitude, and just give it a shot. And I think you'll see great results. Okay, we got last one, Michael. This one, never mind.
I think I may have just, I hope Tyler will put that back up. I wanted to just say to Lynn, I had the opportunity to work with the Northern Territories at Uluru and work with the Aboriginal folks in a lot of the challenges that they faced around alcoholism. In fact, even to the point, Chris, Greg, Dean, in that part of Australia, they've had to actually go to all diesel fuel because even the Aboriginal people in some of those areas have abused gasoline as an intoxicant. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because I think it's lessons that we can learn from each other. What the Aboriginal people are going through in Australia with the movement of children is much like the Native Americans were going through here when we started taking those children from the reservations and placing them in public schools and stripping them from their families. And what we learned over time was that it wasn't real valuable. And I'm not a psychologist, but I think that what I'm trying to say is that we create a global community rather than do things geographically and just because we've always done it that way, and hopefully that helps. And if we could put up that last question, we'll take that one, and hopefully Tyler will remember where that one was. Do you remember what it was, Chris?
I'm going to go scroll here, Mike, and I'll try to find it here. See if I can find it. These are some great comments too, folks. And Dean, one of the gals here said, great way to put it. Well done. There's just so many good things going on here. It was basically what's one case that stays with you. I remember that was the context of it. So, and it's just kind of open up. So who wants to take a shot at that? Greg?
Well, the case that stays with me was probably, there's many cases, of course. Interesting, I think you guys all identify with this. As you're driving down the road, you come across a particular scene, a scenery that will click your memory back to a case that you looked at and remind you of a disposal site or a crime scene. And so I honestly, I believe that every case I've ever looked at, I've never forgotten. And I still have very articulate and vivid memories of the crime scenes and the photographs, etc. But the one that stands out the most for me, probably had the most dramatic effect for me, was an opportunity where I had, as an FBI agent, to testify against a serial killer and link two cases to him from two different jurisdictions. And this was in North Carolina. Matter of fact, John Douglas writes about it in his book, Mind Hunter. And the individual's name is Carl Stephen Mosley. And an individual that was responsible for killing two young ladies. My responsibility in it, and believe me, it took about four different law enforcement agencies to work this thing successfully to get a conviction and incarceration. But my role was to say, look, behaviorally speaking, whoever committed this first crime also committed the second crime. And then I testified against both of those in both of those prosecutions against the same individual, and successfully was able to present sufficient evidence in support of everything else that was done by all the law enforcement agencies involved to indicate that he was responsible for both crimes. And he received two different convictions as well as two separate death penalties. And I've not seen that happen yet. But I can tell you at this point, it hasn't been carried out yet. And unfortunately, so many of the survivors of those individuals that participated in the investigation and even the prosecution that prosecuted it successfully are deceased now, including the victims' families. And I've been advised that when and if and when, hopefully, frankly, the execution is carried out, that I'll be advised of that and even invited to it. And that may sound a little extreme, but understanding the types of behaviors that this individual engaged in and the kind of individual that he is, I can't imagine a more appropriate consequence for that behavior. So I would say that one was probably among the most memorable.
Thank you, Coop. Chris, I don't know about you, but we've had an amazing night. To all of you who have weighed in tonight in the chat room, Meg Otto, thank you so much. We agree with you. Having amazing people like Greg and Dean here, I think, are some of the things that hopefully make us a special place for you to visit from time to time. Dean, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting. It's been a real privilege and a pleasure to be with you guys.
Well, marvelous experiences. Chris, anything?
No, I mean, this is the real deal. We love these guys. And, folks, we're grateful that we have an opportunity to share all of our experiences. But, if you get an opportunity and you know somebody in need and they're stuck with a family member or anything that you feel could use the expertise of the Cold Case Foundation, the first thing you need to do is reach out to the law enforcement agency that's working your family's case. Tell them about Greg, tell them about Dean, tell them about the foundation, and connect those two together. The right there is the website. and see if they can reach out. It has to come through the law enforcement agency primarily. I mean, they'll take other cases, right, guys? But at primarily, that's the best way, because then they can get all the resources available right to them. So, for me tonight, guys, again, it's always an education to be, with you. I cherish every moment over the years of just sitting there in awe, going, "Wow, okay, I'm learning something every single day." So it's great that you came on tonight. We hope that our viewers learned a lot. And by the way, there's going to be a lot more of this. What do you think, Mr. Michael?
Yeah, absolutely. Curious, Georgia, thank you so much. We with you agree. It's assignment time, folks.
Right.
If you remember, we invited you to go to the Profiling Evil map and tell us where on earth you are calling from. This is the where is Waldo moment. And Greg, Dean, this is just an example of where the people from around the world are that are tuning in to the Profiling Evil sessions. So if you go to profilingevil.com, you'll find the map where you can go in and just click on a button and you can enter your information. You don't need to leave your email address. If you want to, we'll put you on the mailing list and get you newsletters and other kinds of content as it becomes available. But it'll also give you an opportunity to decide what kind of stuff you really want to look at. And again, we every once in a while, we have somebody in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean that doesn't know how to move the map around. So who's blowing it across there or something. Now, the other assignment is that is, we asked you to reach out to Suzanne Morphew's family. This is a special invitation to the Mormon family. It's an opportunity for you to just go in and wish them well and give them your heartfelt thanks. We hear it from you. They need to hear it from you. We put this up early this morning. We've already got 216 messages that have gone out to the family. We got a call from the family today, Chris, about this. What did they say?
I'll tell you, Andy and the family are reading these messages, and it was a very moving moment when he said, "Oh my gosh, I cannot believe what I'm seeing." And Mike's idea, he came up with this idea so that we can support the family from all around the world for Suzanne's vigil this weekend. And so get in there. You can put pictures up. We've got a place for notes. And the family are reading these. In fact, he says, "I can't believe there's people from Russia. There's people from Africa. There's people from South America. There's people from Europe." And he just went down a whole list. We've got folks that you're putting your photos up. The family is very grateful. I can't say enough about that. Well done. Well done.
Have you ever seen anything like that, Greg?
No, that's tremendous. I just really applaud you guys. You've done a great service, and keep up the good work, because you're not only talking about the cases, but you're teaching principles that improve people's lives. And it's just a pleasure and an honor to participate and associate with you. We love you.
Well, we love you. And folks, you can just click at the bottom of that map, go to profilingevil.com, and you can scroll to the map and you can enter your comments in there. There's a little app. There's a link on there for the app so that you can watch on your mobile phone and see these coming in real time. So the moment you put it in, 6 seconds later, it'll be on the map, and the Morphew Mormon family will be reading those, and they'll be casting your prayers with theirs heavenward in hopes that they recover Suzanne. If we can just scroll down a little, you'll see there's a simple link where you can send in your invitation, and then we also will provide the link for the little phone app so that you don't have to move around the map as much. So, folks, thank you so much for all that you are doing to enrich our lives. Greg, Dean, thank you for what you're doing to change the world. It really is making a difference. And to everyone who's joined us tonight, we have had more than 500 people on throughout the entire thing. We wish you the very best. Chris's hands are up, so I'm going to give him a second here.
Monday, Mike, what do we have? And by the way, press the subscribe button, share this with your friends. But Mike, what's happening Monday? Come on, give them a clue.
It's choir practice Monday night, and we got something cool coming, and I ain't lying. So we'll just see you Monday night. And thanks, everyone, from all of us at Profiling Evil. Please be safe and know that we care so much about you, and we're so grateful for you. Thanks a lot.
Good job.
Thanks,
Thanks, guys.
Good night.
Adios.